welcome to Landlord Voice, a podcast by the Scottish Association of Landlords that digs deep into the issues that matter to the private rented sector in Scotland. My name is Alan Grant, and I'm joined by SAL's Chief Executive and man with an encyclopedic knowledge of housing in Scotland, John Blackwood. John, welcome back to Landlord Voice. We made it to a second episode.
I know, thanks Alan. Yeah, and it's wonderful to obviously have another opportunity to come together and discuss all things that are important to landlords and letting agents in Scotland. When we were actually planning this session, we were thinking, just a month on from recording the last one, will we have enough to say? And it's amazing as to what's happened over the last month. So there's a lot to chat about, a lot to go through.
I mean, there certainly is. I mean, following initially the news that we have a new Cabinet Secretary for Housing, Màiri McAllan, who, following John Swinney's mini reshuffle, returns from maternity leave to take over from Paul McAllan's.
Yeah, and I think that's the big news of the day. So big issues for us in the private rented sector. What does that mean? And we'll delve into that a little bit more in this podcast. But I think the first thing before we go any further is I want to really pay tribute to Paul McAllan and the work that he's actually done for the wider housing sector in taking on board our concerns and our issues that we took to him. I know it's very easy for us all to criticise politicians, and that's what we should be doing. And politicians are very good at telling us what they want us to hear or what they think they want us to be saying. But its actions speak much louder than the words. And the thing about Paul McAllan is he was always very keen to meet with us. And I have to say, I think he was the most approachable minister that I've had contact with for a number of years now, and he was always keen to listen to our concerns and also come to us and say, John, this is what we're thinking of doing. What do you think about it? And it allows us to give an insight from the private rented sector as to why something would work or wouldn't work. And I'm pleased to say he's taken on a lot of those ideas that we've given and reflections that we have talked about with him certainly in the last few months. So it's sad to see him go, but hopefully the new minister will be able to pick up on some of the work that we did do with Paul and what Paul was promising us.
Indeed. Well, I'm quite sure that there are lots of people across the PRS in Scotland who will reflect on Paul McAllan's time as housing minister, particularly about the reset, the sort of positive change in relationships with landlords, and I'm sure everyone involved in this podcast, involved in SAL, wishes him the very best as he leaves government. However, it does beg the question. We have, as I said, a new housing Cabinet Secretary for Housing, Màiri McAllan. I think one of the, if not the youngest CabSec we've ever had in the Scottish government in the devolved era. So the question I think that jumps out, or certainly jumps off the top of my head, is will this change in relationship, this reset, whatever we want to call it, do we think that's going to continue with Màiri McAllan, or can we expect something a bit different from her?
Well, that is the big question. So none of us really know. So we're all a bit crystal ball gazing at the moment to understand what that means for us. I think the good thing that we can certainly take from it is that she is, as you mentioned, a young minister. She's somebody who's coming into the government with energy, with enthusiasm, who is interested in making a difference and making her mark, which is really important. For some years, we in the private rented sector and others in the housing sector have been saying that really we don't just need a housing minister, we need whoever is in charge of housing to be sitting round that cabinet table. So it has to be a cabinet secretary position. So this is the first time that's happened. So we actually have a housing minister who is sitting in the cabinet. And that, moreover, elevates the importance of housing in government. And that allows us to obviously deal with one person, which is important, to make sure that we get that opinion of landlords and letting agents over, and that our voice is heard to those that literally matter, who are sitting around the cabinet table.
Absolutely, that cabinet secretary level position, because it's odd to have a a housing crisis without a cabinet secretary responsible for it. It seems that is certainly a step forward in the in the structure of the Scottish government. Interestingly, it won't be Màiri McAllan's first cabinet secretary role. She's been cabinet secretary for net zero energy. She's held the transport brief. She's held the environment brief and the land reform brief. So we're talking about, although she is very young, a very experienced politician, a very experienced minister at the same time. So I'm wondering, do you think her level of experience sitting around that table will be a good thing for housing in Scotland, and particularly for the PRS?
Yes, no, I think it certainly will. At least it's not a completely new brief to her, so she has got that experience that you've outlined. Housing perhaps is going to be a new brief, but nevertheless it is intertwined with all of these other aspects that we've been talking about. So she is very keen to build upon what's been happening in the past and building upon her experience, as I say, importantly, to make her mark and make sure that her department is very much seen in the forefront of the government and how it plans to definitely go into an election year, as we will be very, very soon.
Indeed, I'm sure we'll touch on the electoral importance of this sort of later on in the in the podcast. But for now, I understand that obviously Sal is huge on effective engagement and working with ministers on behalf of members, and I understand you've already written to Màiri McAllan welcoming her to the role. Can I maybe this is prying, I'm not entirely sure, but could you tell us what was in that letter?
Yeah,
and
sure.
What you're looking to achieve in working with her?
Yeah, no, exactly. Obviously, it's incumbent for me to reach out to her and congratulate her in her appointment, and certainly coming back into ministerial office as well too. But equally, it's about setting out our stall. It's about saying, we want the private rented sector to be foremost in your thinking when it comes to really changing housing in Scotland and addressing that all-important housing emergency. The private rented sector has got an important role to play in that. So I did mention about the reset. Paul McLennan did promise that he would reset the relationship with private landlords and letting agents, and asking that she honours that promise and continues that work. And that's what I'm very keen to be working on with her in the future. And of course, we've asked for a meeting as early as possible, and that was in my letter, and I'm sure my letter hadn't been received by her office by the time she actually emailed mine, saying that she was very keen to meet up at the earliest opportunity and was trying to look at our respective diaries to see when we can do that. So, and she's very keen as well in her communications with us that she wants to build upon that relationship. She very much values the private rented sector, wants to see it develop and obviously serve the people of Scotland. So I think that's a good foundation for us to at least start talks and just see how that develops.
Would it be correct to say that you're optimistic about working with her in the future?
Alan, you know me, I'm always optimistic. I have to be in my job. But yes, I think there's positive signs there. And you also have to remember the civil service will be very keen to build upon their work and their relationships that they have developed, especially in recent months. So I hope that, especially as a housing bill is still going through the Parliament, remember that's just completed stage 2 and it's going into its final stage, and that's crucial for the government, especially a minority government. So they'll be very keen to work with all stakeholders to make sure they get the bill through, but it's the best possible bit of legislation that we can collectively achieve.
Now, governments are often accused of not acting quickly enough, of not having the correct priorities. I'm curious just to dig into this point about, first of all, a very senior member of the SNP, a very much a high flyer member of the SNP, and the role being elevated to cabinet secretary level. Does this perhaps show a change in thinking at the heart of the Scottish government? Is this them taking housing, homelessness, the PRS, the whole shooting match, as it were, just that bit more seriously? So is that the impression you get?
Yes, and I think it is very much needed, and I think the government has had to sit back and listen to their critics, of which there are many, who are saying you're not taking this housing emergency seriously enough. So if you do accept there is an emergency and we need to have an action plan to address that, then the very least you need to do is promote the role of housing within government and the need for a good housing system, and which of course includes the private rented sector. So I think to a certain extent they may be being forced to do that, but they're coming to that table, they're saying, yes, we need to tackle the housing emergency, tackle fuel poverty as well too, and really put at the forefront of their agenda as they go into the election. So that these are things they're hoping to win an election on.
You know, with that housing emergency or crisis ongoing, the new minister will have a truckload of work on her desk. John, what do you think her priorities should be?
Well, as I've mentioned, I think it should be the housing emergency, tackling that housing emergency, not just talking about it and developing working groups as to what we can do, but people need to see action. How are we actually providing more homes for people to live in Scotland? So it's a big ask, but that I think has to be her number one priority. The other one is tackling fuel poverty. So how do we do that? And likewise, we've been reflecting on energy efficiency and what the private rented sector will need to do in that regard. So how can we make sure that our homes are energy efficient? These are briefs, as you've mentioned, she's had before, so she's well aware of the politics around all of that and what perhaps government should be doing. So I think we're going to hear much, much more about that with the new Cabinet Secretary. So there's big ticket issues that she needs to tackle, and I think certainly very much in the media they will be keen to see what she's doing and looking for results.
Indeed. So just to sort of build on that, sort of dig down ever so slightly, if there's a year left effectively between now and the next Scottish parliamentary elections, which means again we've got a year of a cabinet secretary for housing. If there's three things our new cabinet secretary could achieve in the next year before we go to the polls, what do you think they should be?
I think it certainly would be, just as I mentioned, tackling the housing emergency. How have they done that? What have they done to alleviate homelessness, lift people out of poverty? Very much the government's focused on eradicating child poverty. So how does housing contribute towards that? So housing is integral in all aspects of our lives. We all need a home, but that home needs to be fit for purpose. And it needs to be a secure place that we all can call home and feel that we have, and not live in fear of losing that as well too. So homelessness is a big issue, so she needs to tackle that as well too. So I think that's going to be a big enough task for any minister, and I'm sure she's up for the challenge, and we'll look forward to seeing what she's going to do with that post.
Indeed, but as ever, there is politics to consider here too. Now, insiders in Holyrood don't just see, and some of the ones that I've had an off-the-record conversation with, can't name your sources in this environment, unfortunately, but they very much see Màiri McAllan not just as the next cabinet secretary for housing, but she's also prominent among the runners and riders to replace John Swinney when he eventually stops being First Minister. Another name that's been mentioned in that conversation is obviously also a certain Stephen Flynn. So what's your take on that, broadly speaking, and how the impending changing of the guard within the SNP and potentially within the Scottish Government, and what does that mean for the PRS?
Well, first of all, we've seen the shuffling of the chairs. So it's a case of, yes, we're seeing new faces or people taking more prominence in government. And of course, that's all about the government, the First Minister, pulling together the people that he needs to be able to prove to the people of Scotland that they're up for the job and they should be re-elected. So he's looking for big hitters, of which the Cabinet Secretary is. So, and she'll be keen to rise to that challenge. So her brief as we're talking about, is about housing primarily. So she'll be making sure that she makes her mark and does a good job. So for us, where does that leave us? Well, I think there's an opportunity there. There's an opportunity for us to be able to say to the Minister, well, if you are serious about this role and the importance of housing in Scotland and tackling the housing emergency, fuel poverty, etc., then you need to work with us. How are you going to get stakeholders on your side to be able to ensure that the government achieves its aims? So I think there's an opportunity for us to do that now. But equally, we need to come up with ideas. We need to up our game there to be able to say to ministers, in order to achieve X, Y, and Z, this is what we are prepared to do, but you need to work with us in order to do that.
No, obviously every election has its kind of cornerstone issue, whether it's immigration, whether it's Brexit, depends on the circumstances. Do you get the feeling that housing is going to be absolutely central to Holyrood 2026? I certainly hear from people I talk to that it's going to be absolutely pivotal. It's going to be there with child poverty, with potentially behaviour in schools as kind of the bedrock of what this election is going to be fought on, and if so, what can Sal do to move the needle on that one and get involved in that conversation?
First of all, yes, I think it will, perhaps more so in this election than ever before. So I'm pleased about that. The role that Sal will have is, of course, in promoting private housing and the private rented sector, and saying that we are part of the solution here in Scotland's housing crisis. We're actually not the problem. So it's a case of, we have all these landlords operating in Scotland. You should be encouraging them not only to stay in the sector, but actually to continue to invest. So how could they do that? We need more and more rented homes. We need housing of all types. And, let's not get away from the reality. What we need is more affordable social homes. And we really need the public sector to lead the way in developing those homes. So that's our local authorities and our registered social landlords, as well as the government players. So that's where the responsibility really lies. And they must take the lead on that. But we also have a responsibility in the private rented sector, because we provide valuable homes. And the government needs us. I always say this, that you can always criticise governments for how they support or not private landlords and letting agents. But whether they like us or not, they need us. So they need to work with us. So how can we rise to that challenge and say, okay, we are prepared to provide the homes, but this is what you're going to have to do for us to encourage us to continue to invest. We have an exodus of landlords. Landlords are selling up. They're leaving. Government has to tackle that and say, right, we need to stop that or encourage new investment. So how's that going to work? And so that gives us an opportunity to come up with ideas, to work together with government to come up with some of the solutions to Scotland's housing problems.
Indeed. Now, so it's all going to be going Holyrood fairly soon, but you were in Holyrood yourself relatively recently, giving evidence to the Social Justice Committee. Now, during that appearance, you urged the Scottish Government and politicians of all parties and stripes to consider a pause to the additional dwelling supplement for landlords. A moratorium, I think, was the exact word. Can you explain the logic behind that and perhaps expand a little on what it is you're actually calling for?
Yeah. I think the main thing about it is about us coming up with solutions. So, and that's the challenge we have in the private rented sector. And so for us as SAL, we were looking at, well, what can we do? What can we bring to that table to help with the housing crisis, the housing emergency? We sit in the Housing 2040 group, which is a group of key stakeholders in Scotland who work with ministers to look at the overall housing emergency. Obviously, my aspect is about looking at the private rented sector and the role that we play. So there's two key asks here. One is that the government tackles this exodus of landlords. So how can it stem that exodus? There will always be landlords leave. That happens in any investment sector, of course it does. But we're not seeing the new investors coming in. So we are going to see hopefully not a rapidly declining PRS, but a declining PRS. And as far as rented homes go, that's not a good thing. So because it means overall we'll see a less supply of private rented homes and homes for rent in general. So we need to look at landlords exiting. How can we support those landlords to stay in the sector? And how can we encourage new investment? Those are the two big things. So in order to do that, and when we're having our chats with our members, and our membership survey at the end of last year was quite telling, not just about the number of landlords leaving the sector, but also about those who, despite all of this, and all the rhetoric we hear from government about the private rented sector, some landlords are saying, I would still invest. I'm still interested in doing that. About 10% of our respondents said that. So that tells us that there's an opportunity here for investment. There's people actively thinking about it, if not actively doing it. So how can we encourage them to do that and moreover encourage more people to do that? So whenever we're talking to them, we're saying, right, okay, what are the challenges in you investing in more properties to let? And they're saying the number one issue is the additional dwelling supplement, that additional tax that's put on landlords. Now, the additional dwelling supplement was introduced to really discourage second home ownership. So, but landlords are caught within that. And what we're saying is, yes, okay, we own the property, but it's not for our own use. We're actually buying it to rent out to other people in housing need. So should we be covered by that same system of taxation? So what we're proposing to government is there should be a moratorium. I'm not saying scrapping it completely. I would love that, but that ain't going to happen, and we have to be realistic. But we're saying let's have a moratorium during the housing emergency, or for a period of time that the government could dictate. And it could say if a landlord goes out there and invests in a new property, they don't have to pay that 8% additional dwelling supplement. So there's a levy there. So they don't have to do it. Perhaps on condition it is let for a certain period of time, or it's targeted at certain markets. For instance, bringing empty homes back into use could be one thing. Government's very much focused on that. How can these properties are lying empty, how can we utilise them as homes for people to live in? So let's incentivise people to invest, buy those properties, do them up, and bring them back to the rental market. So how can we do that? So it's about a targeted approach. So it's not, I'm not out there saying, yes, landlords should get tax breaks. This is not what this is about. It's about how can we support landlords who want to invest, which in the long term will alleviate Scotland's housing emergency. It's just part of the solution. I'm not saying, obviously, this is the solution, but what can the private rental sector bring to the table? Well, this is something it could. And to invest in a new home takes time. So if the government, through its local authority partners and RSLs, are investing in new social homes to rent, affordable homes, that's great, and yes, we need more of that, but it's going to take time. It takes time to build houses, and it's expensive. It's about 200,000 to 300,000 to build a new unit for a family to live in. Now, in the private rented sector, well, they're existing, they're out there. So if we could encourage a landlord to buy a similar type property in the second-hand market and just allow them not to pay that additional dwelling supplement of 8%, well, you don't have to be the brain of Britain to work out that 8% of that purchase price is going to be a lot less than 200,000.
True, and it's I think because it is a significant chunk of change, if you will, it's that 8% shows it's not just a signal, as it were. It's a genuinely serious policy, and we would hope that the committee would take on board what you said and would push through. But just turning to other policy developments for a moment, SAL recently issued a warning about Scottish Government proposals that I believe they're consulting on to introduce a minimum energy efficiency standards, or MEES, I believe is the acronym, onto landlorded properties. Could you explain just a little bit about what these standards are, what they mean, and what the possible consequences, particularly the unintended consequences, as I'm sure there might be?
Well, we've been waiting for this legislation for some years now, and now we finally have it. So we have a number of concerns around the consultation, not least about the timing of the consultation and when landlords would need to comply with it. But the good news is, of course, the Minister with responsibility will be the Cabinet Secretary. So we will be dealing with the same Minister with regards to housing and energy efficiency. So that's good from our perspectives in the sense of building relationships and making our voice heard with those in power that need to hear it effectively. And I'm delighted that on this podcast, we're welcoming our policy manager from SAL, Caroline Elgar. And Caroline's going to tell us a little bit more about that consultation and what that means for landlords and letting agents. So welcome, Caroline.
Thank you, John.
Thanks very much for taking time to join us. It's lovely to have you here as part of this podcast. Now, of course, you're a policy manager, very much in the forefront of what's happening there, and indeed all the work that's been happening in the last month in dealing with both politicians and civil servants. And we've been talking in the podcast in this session about the appointment of the new housing minister as a cabinet secretary. What does that mean for landlords and letting agents? We've been chatting about that. But of course, we've had this new legislation published with regards to energy efficiency and the consultation on that. What does that mean for landlords and letting agents? Should we be worried about this, or what do we need to be focusing on, and how, of course, can we respond to the consultation?
So the government has actually been planning to introduce a minimum energy efficiency standard in the private rented sector in Scotland for over 10 years now. I first started joining government meetings about it in 2014. And over that sort of decade, we've had many proposals, many consultations, but we've never got to the point of a minimum standard actually being introduced. This consultation that was published earlier this month sets out new proposals to introduce a minimum energy efficiency standard in the private rented sector in Scotland. So it proposes that from 2028, if you have a change of tenant, and from 2033 for all remaining properties in the sector, the property will need to meet an energy efficiency rating of C. Now that the first sort of further complication there is that the government is also reforming energy performance certificates. They're going to, from next year, probably towards the end of next year, there'll be new energy performance certificates available that have what's called a heat retention rating on them. And that will be the key rating on the energy performance certificate. And that is what this standard is going to be measured against. So if you have an EPC that is currently at C, you may find that once you get a new EPC done under this new system, your rating will change. It may be higher, it may be lower. It really depends on how well insulated your property is. The better insulated your property is, the better it will score on this new heat retention rating. So the difficulty here is that landlords can't really plan at the moment for this because they don't know yet whether their property is going to be compliant with the new standards or not. So we would encourage landlords to carefully read what's being proposed in the consultation and the draft regulations. If they have views they would like to share with the government on that, to put in their own response to that before the deadline date, which is the 29th of August. And if you're a member of SAL, we would encourage you to share your response with us so that we can read what our members' views are, and that will help to inform our own response to the consultation.
Now, of course, as the Scottish Association of Landlords, we support any measures to encourage our homes to become more energy efficient. That's something I think we would all sign up to. But of course, it has to be practical, it has to be measured. And of course, landlords and letting agents need to be supported in this process in order to adapt and upgrade their properties. What's SAL's biggest concern about these proposals within the consultation?
So our biggest concern is the timescales involved. So as I mentioned earlier, this new EPC is not going to be available for landlords to acquire until towards the end of next year. And then if it turns out from your EPC that you are going to have to carry out improvement work, there is then a further more detailed assessment that you can commission, which is called a HEATSA assessment. It stands for Heat and Energy Efficiency Technical Suitability Assessment. Now that HEATSA assessment is not available at the moment. It's only really just been thought of by the government, and there's a consultation out at the moment on exactly how that will operate as well. But the consultation on that suggests that the HEATSA assessment won't be available until 2028. So we're looking at a detailed assessment that landlords may need to help them decide what improvements to install in their property, not being available until the time that the first properties will have to comply with this standard. So we feel that that's just not enough lead-in time for landlords to properly prepare for this coming in. So our big ask is that 2028 date be pushed back.
All sounds very confusing. So there's a lot, I guess, yet to, of course, be decided, and that's what the consultation is about. But I guess on one hand, you could think 2028 was still a few years away from that, 3 years away. But really what you're outlining to us is actually you don't have that time, because you wouldn't know what to do until literally the deadline comes in, which is the 1st of April 2028 for new tenancies. So there's a lot for landlords really to grapple with and to understand before they do anything at all. So is this something that SAL is planning about informing landlords about in the future? Is this very much on the agenda for information to landlords and letting agents in the coming months and over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so we've already shared details of the consultation with members, and we will keep members updated with any developments in this regards. It's worth mentioning also that at our Scottish Letting Day on the 21st of October, I will be giving a presentation about these proposals. I'm hoping also to be joined by somebody who can give details of exactly how to upgrade your properties. So the sort of practicalities of doing things like floor insulation and wall insulation. So it might be worth booking your tickets to come along to that.
Good plug, thank you for that, Caroline. That's good. We want as many landlords and letting agents to be attending conference as possible.
And just remind the audience, when is that conference again?
The 21st of October.
There we go.
Day event at Màiri McAllan in Edinburgh.
Always going to plug it twice. Brilliant.
And I think we're going to be talking a lot about that in the next podcast as well, the next few before conference itself. So all very interesting, a lot happening there. And of course, Caroline's very much leading on this bit of work on behalf of SAL to make sure that our voice is heard with those politicians and civil servants. You've got a meeting coming up soon, is that right, Caroline, with the civil servants? Airing our concerns?
Yes, I'm meeting them next week to go over some of our key concerns and questions about the consultation.
Thank you. That's great. Well, no doubt you'll be back online talking to us about it and any progress that's been made on that as well. Now, as well as being our policy manager at the Scottish Association of Landlords, Caroline is our advice manager as well too. So she's heading up an advice team, and no surprises in thinking that definitely that's the number one benefit to SAL members in becoming members. Tell us a little bit more about the advice line and that service that's available to landlords and letting agents.
Yeah, so the advice line is one of the key member benefits. It's one of the reasons, or the main reason, I think a lot of our members join up. So it's a telephone helpline service. We have 6 members of staff that work on that helpline service. So members will call or email in with their queries, and we'll phone them back and give them the advice that they need. So we get between about 300 and 350 queries per week. So it's a massive 16,000 queries per year approximately. So get queries about all sorts of things, but the most popular topic, about a third of queries, are about how to end a tenancy. So how to serve notice, or how to navigate the tribunal process if your tenants don't move out at the end of the notice period. So that's the sort of the big topic. We also get queries about how to set up a tenancy, how to increase rent, queries about maintenance and safety checks and things like that.
So it's anything to do with your landlord-tenant relationship, so in managing tenancies in Scotland. Now, with regards to energy efficiency, of course, the consultation has just been published, so it's very, very new for us all to understand and get our head round. Are members phoning asking about that, and maybe what's the kind of big question you're being asked on the helpline with regards to energy efficiency?
So the big question we get asked all the time is, does my property need to comply with a minimum energy efficiency standard? A lot of landlords and letting agents are really confused because we have had, as I said earlier, it's about 7 consultations about regulating energy efficiency in the private rented sector, and they've all proposed different things in terms of minimum standards and introduction dates. So so a lot of people phone about that, and of course the answer to that is no, you do not need to have a minimum energy efficiency standard at your property at the moment. You can rent it out regardless of what the EPC rating is, but as we've discussed, that will change in the future.
And the main thing there is thinking about what we need to do and when we need to do it. So, and what advice is out there, and hopefully Sam will be able to put all those pieces of the jigsaw together for us in the coming months and, as I say, the next couple of years as well too. Caroline, thanks for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you and finding out a little bit more about what's coming up for landlords and letting agents in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you, Caroline, and thank you, John. And with that, our second episode of Landlord Voice comes to an end. Before we finish, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who has left us such positive feedback about the podcast so far. It takes a lot of time and effort to put these things together, and so hearing and reading nice things about all our work on this show is very, very encouraging. If you'd like to leave us some feedback, you can find details about how to do that in the outro credits of the show. But for now, and for this episode, from me, Alan Grant, and for John Blackwood, we'll see you next time. Landlord Voice is a podcast by the Scottish Association of Landlords, produced in partnership with Alan Grant Communications and Mallard Productions. All footage and music was used with permission. Questions, comments, suggestions, or other feedback should be sent to alan@alangrantcommunications.com.